should confess from the beginning I'm someone who cheated, but I'll try to go very quickly through the contextualizing image to fixate on this one. It is not a prepossessing photograph, a deserted platform outside the bleak, segregated waiting room of the Memphis bus station in the 1960s. Taken by Ernest C. Withers, celebrated for his coverage of the civil rights struggles, especially the Emmett Till murder trial, musical performers and the social universe of Black Memphis, this understated image seems to offer little beyond a visual transcript of the two colored waiting room signs. Yet there is something perhaps productively disquieting about the randomness of the scene. The jumbled suitcases, empty luggage carts at incoherent angles, and door propped open for no apparent reason. Some disjunction between the lawfulness that issues from the two signs formally printed and mounted at right angles, and the disarray below that elicits a desire to tidy things up and close the image off as a stable, knowable scene from the past, like the one in another of Withers' photographs, also of the Memphis bus station, whose balanced composition allows us to feel that we know what we need to about this historical moment, that it is legible, shameful, and over. By evoking and resisting this desire for closure, the photograph I have chosen raises the question of legibility. A question not of seeing race through some direct perception or imposition on the body, as in the fixing of race on skin depicted by Fanon's famous scenario, Look, a Negro, but of reading race through the grid of its linguistic mediation. Withers' photograph invites us to consider race at the intersection of two technologies of sign production, graphic and photographic, and to examine the operations through which the visual technology might rewrite rather than simply reiterate the taxonomies of the verbal. My choice of this photograph as the occasion for this inquiry is determined in part by its position as the representative Jim Crow photograph in the Signal collection, widely celebrated as the first comprehensive history of African American photography. Reflections in Black history of Black photographers 1840 to the present, curated by Deborah Willis, which opened in 2000 at the Smithsonian Institute and was accompanied by a volume that came out at the same time with Willis's commentary. Although the nearly 600 photographs included in that exhibit depict a variety of signage, this is the only one to represent an actual Jim Crow sign. This is not surprising in light of the exhibit's fundamental goal of documenting, as Robin D.G. Kelly puts it in his foreword to the volume, how, and this is a quote, the camera became a mighty weapon in the hands of pioneering Black photographers to counter the deliberate distortion of Black images in popular culture, primarily by creating dignified images of African Americans who, although often directly engaged in combating racism, were not obsessed by race, but rather were embedded in a rich interior world far more meaningful to them than the rantings of the white-robed great wizard or the visible signs of Jim Crow, close quote. But since one such visible sign is depicted in this collection, we might wonder why this one, not in terms of the curatorial intention to which I have no access, but rather in terms of the visual logic or legibility of the image, beyond its contribution, which is noted in the text portraying the duality of Southern life, which arguably any Jim Crow image could do. To frame this visual logic in terms of the negotiation between verbal and visual signs, I will begin by resituating this image in a different archive, that of photographs of Jim Crow signs, an archive that I've been assembling for too many years, and in particular, the small subset of photographs of segregated waiting rooms, which was the subject of special interest to African American photographers, in contrast to the drinking fountains, which may be your mental image of the Jim Crow system, which was the preferred subject of the white photographers. There are a variety of reasons for that. I will then return to the location of this image within Reflections in Black as a way of thinking about the engendering of archives. Let me start, however, by signaling some of what's at stake in this inquiry for me. I would like to make the case for photography's potential to open up questions of race against the backdrop of the medium's widely recognized and condemned implication in the rise of 19th century social sciences, especially physical anthropology, that subjected members of disenfranchised cultures, classes, and races to the scrutinizing gaze that determined and compared their defining features and ranked them hierarchically. Race was produced on the bodies of others by an invisible observer whose accomplice and prosthesis was the camera. Coco Fusco has described this function trenchantly, this is a quote. Rather than recording the existence of race, photography produced race as a visualizable fact. Photography has served as the primary guarantor of race as a visual indicator of invisible differences. Visual indicator of invisible differences. So this troubled legacy of photography's enlistment in defining and legitimating the somatic science of race has burdened the question of the medium's potential to call into question the graphic sides of race, such as we see here, that were superimposed on the social rather than the biological body of much of the United States for almost a century. It is important to start by acknowledging some disturbing formal continuities. Lacking some kind of comprehensive or hypothetically aerial perspective to grasp the whole system, photographers who were primarily northern white liberal photographers typically sought to compose a summary image of the system that aligned representative bodies and signs within a single frame that risked reinforcing the sign's defining force even in the process of protesting. And this may be, this is probably the most famous of the Jim Crow images. This is by Elliot Irwin, and it shows up in almost any archive of photography and race in many of the sort of civil rights museums. The camera's unwilling or unwitting collaboration with the structures that it deplores can be detected in the persistence of some of the formal markers of 19th century visual anthropology. The camera's frontal position and medium distance suggests mastery over its subject, while the evenly lit and carefully balanced composition reinforces the impression of a fully legible scene. The uneasy compromise between political critique and formal confirmation of dominant social categories was consolidated in the liberal documentary rhetoric of the New Deal, and especially in the Home Security Administration archive, that Central Photographic Archive. So to shift from drinking fountains to the waiting rooms that are of special interest here, this is just a quick example. This is John Fasham, one of the FSA photographers, photograph of a railroad station in Manchester, Georgia, just to call attention to some features of the rhetoric here. It's clearly a rhetoric of type rather than of individuals. We have four minimally distinguished underemployed, unemployed workers dressed similarly in braces, hanging out at the back of the station, defined almost entirely, because it's a lack of other information about them, who they are, what their work is, do they work, what their families are, etc., simply by the double signage behind them. This seems to capture Jim Crow's disciplinary force with special effectiveness, I suppose, the state of arrest that Orlando Patterson has so aptly called social death. This might be considered a baseline of documentary representation of race that the mid-century African-American photographers inherited and often attempted to rework by manipulating what Roland Barthes calls the rhetoric of the image. As that phrase implies, the rhetoric of the image is analogous to verbal rhetoric, insofar as it attempts to shape the viewer's response by deploying the cultural connotations of visual codes that are as conventional in their nature, despite the appearance of naturalness as the symbolic codes of language. So things like lighting, posture, props, camera angle, all these are kind of components of the rhetoric of the image.